A curse on ye millionaires, who sit at home in your easy chairs, and crack your nuts and sip your wine, while I wail over this son of mine. January 10th, 1860, is yet another day for the workers in the Pemberton Mill in Lawrence, Massachusetts. Christmas holidays are gone, and the long working hours are back. There are more than 600 people inside the mill, men, women, and even children. Entire families are employed. With 50 cents per day wages, all hands welcome the work to put the food on the table. For the children of the mid-19th century New England, there's no playtime, only 12-hour shifts. We're in the gloomy ages of the Industrial Revolution, and things are going to get even darker on this day. Around 5 p.m., the buzzing sound of spindles and looms is disrupted by a thundering noise coming from the south wing of the building, as if an earthquake was shaking the mill. Before any of the workers inside realizes what's going on, the floor sinks beneath their feet. All of a sudden, the entire building collapses on their heads. The crumbling lasts for a few seconds before silence prevails under the pile of bricks, timber, and iron. Only here and there, a cry for help breaks through. Hundreds of workers are buried underneath what just moments ago was a busy mill. To their misfortune, it was only the beginning of the worst industrial disaster in the history of the United States. Pemberton Mill was just one of many mills in the industrial area of the small town of Lawrence, near Boston, Massachusetts. In 6 buildings, there were more than 900 workers employed. Most of them were Irish immigrants, working for the lowest wages. In the ownership of respectable industrialists George Howe and David Nevin Sr., the mill earned an enormous profit, primarily because of low wages and the extensive work output. There were 2,700 spindles and 700 looms housed inside the main building, which was constructed only 17 years ago, but many considered such a large amount of machinery too heavy. And indeed, it was. That fateful day, workers were making a machine rearrangement on one of the floors. Nothing unusual, as spindles and looms were constantly arriving. The rest of the mill was busy as usual, but again, nothing implied a tragedy was about to happen. Then, at 4:43 p.m., out of nowhere, the floor at the 4th level at the southern corner of the building gave in. Under the heavy load of machinery, the entire floor collapsed. Tons of iron fell, causing one after another floor to collapse. Like a house of cards, the 280-foot-long and 84-feet-wide building tumbled down. The collapse lasted just a couple of seconds. A passerby recalled walking by the mill and admiring its grandeur. After he passed barely 30 yards, he heard a loud crash, turned back, and saw just a mass of ruins on the spot where the building used to be. Inside, workers had no idea what struck them. The entire mill construction, with tons of machinery, fell upon their heads. The chances of surviving the collapse were minimal. Yet, moments after the dust settled, people started coming out of the wreck. Many of them were injured, their limbs broken, and their faces covered in blood. Miraculously, some of them were intact. A boy, covered in dust, emerged from beneath the pile of timber without a scratch. He calmly walked out onto the street, lit his pipe, and strolled away from the scene. The deadly silence that followed the collapse was interrupted by frantic cries. Unfortunately, many more workers trapped in the building remnants and machinery could not get out on their own. Nobody knew how many people were buried underneath it. Each second was essential to them. Workers from the nearby buildings rushed to the rescue, helped by those who survived the collapse with bruises only. The alarm was sounded and raised the attention of the entire town. Citizens of the peaceful Lawrence never experienced any calamity, let alone a disaster of such a scale. Nevertheless, they all rushed to help. In perfect discipline, rescuers removed barrier after barrier, working their way into the inner part of the ruins. Cries for help and groans of the dying pushed them to work beyond their power. It was only thanks to their superhuman effort that a good deal of those trapped avoided certain death. Scores of them, however, ended up with severe injuries. Unfortunately, some workers couldn't be rescued. A heavy load pressed their bodies, and their death was unavoidable. One of whom was a girl named Mary Bannon. Realizing she was about to die, she asked a friend to pass her paycheck on to her dad and say goodbye for her. There were a lot more dead bodies pulled up. As the rescuers kept clearing the debris, the probability of finding more survivors was lower. It didn't stop them, though. As long as there was the slightest chance of saving a living soul, they were ready to dig. The effort to save as many lives as possible lasted for 4 hours. Every moment, a new survivor was dug out, or a body was recovered. Those recognized by their friends or family were taken home, regardless of their injuries. Others were taken to the city hall. Then, as if things couldn't get any worse, at 9:30 p.m., a whole new tragedy struck the site. A diligent effort of a small army of rescuers was suddenly interrupted by a loud cry. Fire! While clearing the ruins, someone accidentally knocked over an oil lantern and ignited the cotton waste and wood splinters. Inside the wreckage were tons of cotton waste and timber soaked with oil, dripping from the broken machines. The fire spread rapidly before the eyes of surprised and helpless rescuers. The agonizing cry of despair of those trapped beneath the ruins grew louder, mixed with the screams of horrors of those who witnessed this terrifying scene. Racing with the raging fire, brave rescuers kept dragging out people. Unfortunately, it was a futile effort, as the fire was swallowing the ruins at an unimaginable speed. Among the trapped when the fire broke out was an overseer, Maurice Palmer, urging his friends to save him before the fire reached him. Alas, as the fire was sweeping around with the rescuers unable to dig him out, Maurice Palmer decided to prevent the horrible death in flames. He managed to release one of his hands, drew his knife, and slit it across his throat. In a cruel twist of fate, Maurice's friends succeeded in rescuing him from the wreck before the fire reached them, but the poor fellow died of his wounds. The Lawrence Fire Brigade was quick to arrive at the scene. 11 streams connected to the hydrants at the nearby Washington Mill were trying to extinguish the blaze. Late after the fire broke out, a steam fire engine from Manchester arrived to help. Throughout the whole night, the firefighters fought the flames while rescuers tried to dig out the few who could yet be saved. It was all in vain, though. The massive cotton waste, timber, and oil made the fire uncontrollable. Cries faded one by one in the darkness and engulfing flames. The dawn revealed the scene of desolation and death. Nevertheless, the firefighters and rescuers were still persistent in recovering at least the remains of their fellow citizens. The last of the ruins had been examined on January 20th, 10 days after the collapse. All bodies except those completely burned were recovered. While some were found in nearly perfect condition, others were horribly disfigured or mutilated. All the time, at the scene, were family members of the killed, waiting for the bodies of their beloved ones to be taken out from the ruins. However, the disaster attracted many visitors from other towns and cities who poured into town several days to witness the tragedy. Bizarrely, they were collecting relics from the scene of the disaster. A contemporary report records, quote, "A gentleman from St. Louis was procuring a large bundle, taking not only burned fragments of clothing found upon the victims, spindles of yarn from the general mass of ruins, but even a part of a brick and the mortar which came from its surface." Out of an estimated 670 workers inside the mill, 307 escaped unhurt, 159 were slightly injured, and 116 were severely wounded. 88 workers lost their lives in the collapse and the ensuing fire. It is believed that the final death toll was higher, reaching 145 dead workers since many of the severely injured had succumbed to their wounds at home. The tragedy deeply shocked the citizens of the small town of Lawrence. The working community, however, had their grief mixed up with the feelings of anger. The working conditions in Pemberton Mill, as well as in others, were inhumane. They knew very well what the inquiry was yet to discover. The building was destined to collapse. A jury in charge of the official inquiry into the disaster summoned many witnesses, including mill workers, overseers, and people engaged in building the mill. The latter testified that they complained to the architect that walls were insufficient for a building of such size. The bricks were laid using low-quality mortar. The walls were not thick enough, and they had large windows that further weakened the entire construction. On the east side of the building, there were no towers or projections to support the construction, even though it was a general custom. The lack of these caused the building to incline that way, falling about 85 feet toward the east. The inquiry further discovered that the hollow-cast iron pillars, which supported the flooring and timbers, had casting defects. So unstable was the building that workers claimed it rocked and swayed when all the machines were operating, especially when the looms happened to be synchronized. When Chief Engineer Charles H. Bigelow was summoned by the jury to explain why the mill was built using low-quality materials, he blamed the owners, whom he claimed to be responsible for buying and approving the material, including the iron castings. When the mill was built in 1853, it belonged to different owners, John A. Lowell and his brother-in-law, J. Pickering Putnam. The two financed the building of a mill at the cost of $850,000. At the time, it was an actual fortune, and the two financiers did their best to finish the building as soon as possible and cut the expenses wherever they could. The result was weak construction, yet sufficient to meet the demands of the business. However, in 1857, Lowell and Putnam sold the mill to George Howe and David Nevin Sr., wealthy New England merchants, industrialists, and investors. Eager to boost the mill's profit, the new owners bought more machines. At the time of the disaster, there were 2,700 spindles and 700 looms in operation. It was a heavy load for a building of such weak construction, yet it brought its owners an annual profit of $1,500,000. It was a good bargain for the risk of having a building collapse. On the day of the disaster, the south end of the fourth story simply gave in under a load of machinery and pulled down the entire building structure. However, the inquiry found no one to be guilty. Neither the investors who used low-quality materials to build the building, the architect in charge, nor even the owners who overloaded it with heavy machinery. Such was the America of the Industrial Revolution era. One of the owners, David Nevin Sr., bought out his partner and built a new mill at the site. The business went on as usual. On the other hand, the disaster did call for more rigid rules for the construction of industrial facilities. It also stirred the workers' consciousness about the importance of safety standards in industrial workplaces. The Pemberton Mill disaster warned them that the greed of wealthy industrialists went far beyond their health, wealth, and even their lives. Is your wallet stuffed like a turkey? Do your keys sound like a fire alarm? Well, then you need today's sponsor, the Ridge Wallet. Built with high-end materials designed to last, their wallets expand to carry up to 12 cards, plus room for cash. There are over 30 colors and styles, including my favorite, burnt titanium. You'll also love the Ridge key case, which organizes up to 6 keys into a minimalistic compact silhouette. Do you hear that? Very nice and quiet. And of course, each wallet comes with a lifetime warranty. If you're looking for the perfect gift, head over to ridge.com/darkhistory to save up to 40% through December 22nd. That's ridge.com/darkhistory. Watch this episode next if you found this video interesting. Please add a like and leave a comment if you want to support the channel.